All right, we're going to jump into this last one today. Um, Here it is. We're going to talk about, well, this kind of came up last week. We were talking about self-control. And I told you that typically when we talk about self-control, there's another lesson in there on the very thing that we're talking about today. And that is angry, or being angry. And so with this one, it's kind of interesting that if you go back to the very first family in all of the Bible, we learn and can see from the story of Cain and Abel what anger can and will do inside of the home. I'm not going to go all the way into that story, but you remember it, I hope, and that Cain, his offering, his sacrifice was rejected. His brother Abel's was good and was pleasing to God. And as a result of that, we see here in Genesis chapter 4 and verse 5, Cain became very angry and his countenance fell. And so if you remember that story, what happened as a result? Okay, Cain killed his brother Abel. There's your first slow pitch softball. All right. Now, it wasn't just that he destroyed. I mean, really, if you look at the story in full, it wasn't just that he killed his brother, destroyed his brother. What else was the domino effect of all of that? You could argue that Cain really messed up his life. I'm sure messed up his family's life. Really messed up a lot of things. Now, our modern term for when anger boils over to this point where you take someone's life is still murder. Okay? But there are a lot of other words and things at play that we would say when my anger spills over, this is what happens. So give me some of those this is what happens as a result. May not be murder. I hope it's not murder. But what are some other things that we see? We yell. Okay, we yell.
I think a lot of times, Shane, we either blow up or we bury it, one or the other.
Okay.
Those are usually very productive.
Okay, blow up or bury.
Lose
What
control.
Lose control in what ways? I mean,
I mean, I've heard of people throwing things. I've never thrown anything, but
no,
I've heard that people.
you threw something at me one time.
That's a guarantee.
Actually, there's a really funny family story about a slice of pizza.
Oh yeah,
It-
that's actually.
yeah, we won't tell
really
that though. All right. What else?
Tension.
Okay, tension in the house. Just between the two that are angry with each other. Okay, yeah, it affects everybody. Our kids feel it when me and Megan are arguing, which happens all the time. Just kidding. Our kids feel it, right? And good parents try to protect your kids from those moments where we're angry. What else?
You can deal with those consequences for a long time,
Okay, so there's like a carryover effect? We might say. Someone else said something.
Like avoidance or like a divide.
Okay, so avoidance, maybe we think of like, I'm gonna isolate myself, or I'm gonna move this way, you go that way. How about like, let's think not necessarily with us, we who are people of the book, I hope. What about out there that is also very extreme, that's in the neighborhood, well, not quite to murder, but what are we talking about here?
Physical.
Okay, physical violence, right? Um, so it's physical, it's emotional. I heard, like we got all the damages that can be done, right? And so I bring that up because what's really staggering. I started to look at some statistics here on domestic violence, and some of this is pretty alarming. So I'm just going to read it and you chew on this as to the reality of what exists in our world, right? And all that we're trying to protect our home from. 1 in 3 women and 1 in 4 men have experienced some form of physical violence by an intimate partner. Intimate partner. 1 in 4 women and 1 in 7 men have been victims of what we would label severe physical violence, whether that's, putting your hands on them. There were some Some carryover words: beating, burning, strangling. Those are pretty severe, we would say. 72% of all murders, suicides involve intimate partners. 94% of the victims of murder suicides are female. Now, those are horrifying things to think about, most especially when that's not us. But what's even more alarming outside of just the husband and wife relationship are the millions upon millions of children that are left with emotional scars, physical scars. You think of sexual abuse, like all the things that go into what Delia just said. There's a carryover effect that's not just in that moment, but lasts for a really long time. All usually, typically, as a result of this one emotion that we're talking about today with anger that spills over. And so, as we've tried to do in this class, we're trying to get to the place where we say Christian homes have to be different. So, we've looked at a lot of these things through that lens and through that perspective. Now, what's really hard here is to say and to draw a line maybe with these that you guys mentioned first. Why did you mention those first? That's what we do. That's kind of how we react in our moments of anger. Now, what's really hard to think about is we reserve these places of murder or physical abuse or emotional abuse only for the really evil people that are out there. But the reality is that really good people can sometimes cross this divide where we might say, okay, some of this is normal, and reach this place where it's actually really dangerous, right? And so I think what we have to see before we start into this is almost all the numbers that I just read to you are a result of not controlling our anger. And so I don't know about you, but is that something you struggle with? Okay.
Yeah,
What, Drew?
sometimes more than others.
Yeah, sometimes some people more than others. Sometimes it depends on the week. It depends on the moment. It depends on who I'm around. And so it may not be that it reaches these places where it's really bad, but again, it's a struggle. Now, let's go into our kids. How about with our kids? Like you see them angry all the time, especially if you have two of them, because they get angry with each other. And I don't know, back to what Sonny said, did they ever throw things?
Oh, yeah.
Did they ever yell? Did they ever blow up? Did they ever lose control? And so it's super hard to teach how to cope with this one emotion that we attach to really bleeding over. And so, this is a really scary one to talk about because no one in here, I don't think, just from looking at your faces and saying hello, has this emotion that's going on right now. It's one of those moments or emotions that just kind of happens and we lose all of our judgment and we go crazy, we lose control. And so as you look at Cain's story a little bit more though, I think that there's another piece of this because before Cain does what he does, what does God do? Remember, or do you recall what God does? Or does God play a role in this moment before Cain does what he does? Let me ask it that way. Remember?
The jealousy?
What's that?
The jealousy?
Okay, yeah, there's some jealousy there, but so he reaches this point where God asks a question. I don't know if you remember, but he says, "Why are you angry? Why is your countenance fallen?" It would do you a lot of good to get rid of this emotion somehow, some way. And if you don't, what does he say?
Sin is crouching.
Sin is crouching at your door. And that's really the neighborhood we get to. It's not as though anger is really bad. It's an emotion that God gave us to do something with. But the problem is when that anger leads into this place where sin is crouching at the door and I don't stop it before I open that door. And so as you look at Cain, we know that he opens that door, he kills his brother. But even if you go through and you read his story again, I don't want to read through all of that. but there is no confession. There is no remorse. There is no, I shouldn't have done this. And so what we see in this moment with Cain is really him feeling like he's right in that moment. And so I want to take this a step farther and say, just because you're angry doesn't make anything that we do as a result of that right. And so when we put the rule that way, that's the way it goes. Because when I look back on my angry moments, and you can too, while I'm ashamed maybe of what I did, put yourself in the place when you lost control. How did you feel? Were you right or were you wrong? Which one?
I'm usually right.
Okay, exactly. Well, that's where we're going, right? So I am going to act on this anger from the standpoint that in that moment I feel what I'm doing is right, right? And that's a dangerous place to be. And so again, back to some of this, like while we're so quick to say murder, physical violence, um, all these severe things are wrong, really, I mean, as you look at this list, are any of these right? No, but what have we said? These become normal. That's how we deal with it, right? And so let me ask you this. Can all of these up here do damage in the home?
Yes.
Yes, the same amount of damage that put my hands on someone might do?
Yes.
Yeah, in some cases, yes, depending on what comes out of my mouth when I yell, how long I blow up and bury it, how long I live in isolation, all those things. Mr. Champ?
I'm ashamed to say this, but it's been many, many years, it's been like 30. I used to yell and scream at my wife. So one day she finally said to me, she says, when you get like that, I'm afraid. And that stopped.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't know how that affects other people. You think yelling's no big deal. I just said, yell, raise my voice a little bit, and it's no big deal. Or whatever it happens to be. But it can have a detrimental effect
Yeah.
if you allow it.
And then on top of that, remember we've been talking about if we are trying to raise our kids up in the way they should go, then who has to be the number one model of who they're looking at us, is what I'm trying to say, right? And so while yes, this stuff happens, we're not here to say like this is never going to happen. But at the same time, like we need to approach it as though we're trying to build a Christian home, right? Now, what's also interesting about this emotion, I mean, if you really think about it, is anger the only emotion at play when it bleeds over into some of this stuff. Have you ever heard the term hurt people do what? Hurt people. Now, it doesn't say what kind of hurt maybe that person's going through. I've used this before, can't remember what class, but this is called the anger iceberg. And so, you guys know enough about an iceberg to know that what's underneath the water is a whole lot larger than what is on top. And so, as we look at anger, more times than not, there's something else that is going on beneath the surface. What's also interesting about anger is no matter what leads to it boiling over, we can say that usually our anger is one that is misinformed or it's misdirected. And so as we go back to Cain, we're not told why God has no respect for Cain's offering, why he saw it as not good. But I love the fact that even after he gets angry, God intervenes. He doesn't let him sit there stewing on it. He tries to get him to get rid of it, and he doesn't. You could also make note of like Luke 15, the story of the prodigal son. Remember the older brother? What does he do? Runs off into the field. What does the dad do? Runs out and chases him, right? And he goes out and he talks to him. And so I think when you look at this story, it's just so interesting to think about Cain. Like, number one, who He asked this the right way. Who should he be angry with? Okay, should be angry with himself. Who is the one that he shouldn't be angry with? His brother, okay? Now here's where the point of misdirection comes into play. His brother did the thing that was right, and in no way, shape, or form should he be angry with him. He should either be angry at himself, or potentially I would say, hey, if you want, be angry with God. I'm not saying that's right, but it's misdirected, his anger. Go ahead, Eric.
Well, I don't know about anybody else, and just go along with what you're saying. And for me, the times that
Me too.
the times that I have gotten angry, I mean, it doesn't happen a whole lot, but it's usually that I'm angry at myself because of what I've done or said, and I'm embarrassed or whatever, but that makes me angry. And a lot of times that, spills
Bleeds over.
over, and I take it out on, other people, so.
So that's a good point. Let me ask you this. Has it ever happened for any of you where someone outside of the home is the result of you feeling one of these things, but then when you come home, who do you take it all out on? Right? So again, back to misdirected, potentially misinformed, which we'll talk more about here in just a second. Because I think when we're dealing with misinformed, maybe we see this best in our kids, especially if you have two. One comes to you and says one thing, and it's bad. And so what's your reaction? Like, I'm fired up. But then when I get back there to do whatever it is you do, they start to talk and you get the whole story. Then what happens to your anger? Starts to go back down, right? So in some ways, we would say that almost all times our anger is either misdirected, it's going to the wrong place, or I don't have all the information at hand, and so therefore I shouldn't reach this place of being angry. Mr. Chant?
We have to learn to address the problem, not the person. That's a difficult thing to do.
Yeah. So like I'm just bringing these two up to show you the different avenues to which we could go with this anger thing. We're not gonna spend a ton of time on that. You could even, I was thinking of David. We talked about David in Psalm 51 not long ago. How misinformed was he when Nathan told him, "You are that man." Remember, he wanted the guy to die. He deserves to die for taking my ewe lamb until he learns and gets the facts about it being him, right? Interesting how that works because he was super angry with the guy in that story. All right, so before we get into some points of application, here's the first piece I would say. Anger clouds our judgment. So in what ways does that happen? How does it do that?
We become so wound up in our emotions that we can't make clear thoughts.
Rational decisions. Yeah. Okay. Kaboom. What else? Or anything else?
You would say things that you normally would never say.
Yeah.
And you know that you don't mean it, but at the time, it's like you mean it at the time. You're so angry, you can't comprehend what you're saying.
Right.
You don't know what you're saying.
Yeah.
But you don't realize it till it's all over.
Yeah.
And people's feelings are hurt.
Well, so I started to, I was doing some reading on this clouding of judgment piece. I like what this says. I want to read it to you. Anger is a lot like alcohol. One of the dangers of alcohol is that it lowers our inhibitions and we begin to consider doing and saying things that we never would if we were sober. When we are in the moment under the influence, what we are doing feels right and it feels appropriate. But for those outside, it seems completely unbelievable. This is what anger does. And I think that's a good connection maybe we can make to what this looks like in that it's out of control. We see it with Cain. You see it in the story of Jonah, a man who is angry that God is going to save Nineveh. But before it even talks about Jonah being angry about that, he talks about how God is so patient and he's so loving and he's all these things. But then he lashes out and loses his mind in anger over what he's doing. I thought about, or no, the book mentioned King Nebuchadnezzar. This is the instance with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, right? It's one thing to be, send three guys into a furnace of fire. It's another thing when they don't bow down to turn the furnace up 7 times hotter. So would you say it's clouded as judgment? I mean, how much more dead can you get? 7 times more dead over turning up a furnace? You know what I mean? Like he just completely loses it. So I don't know. I know you don't need excessive, scripture or stories to prove this point. We can look at our own lives, can't you? I mean, I can look at moments in my life. I'm right there with you, Eric. It doesn't happen for me often, but I can look at those moments and say, now where I am today, I feel ashamed and I feel guilt about what I did. But in that moment, it just like, ugh, right? It's crazy in that way. So let me stop there. Any comments? Anything you want to add to that? Go ahead, Drew.
When we're angry and we don't like settle down,
Mhm.
it's kind of like, and we react, we just immediately react. It's kind of like the difference between lobbing a hand grenade or using a sniper rifle, right? Sniper rifle, you can pick your target, you can hit. You throw a hand grenade, you may hit your target, but you're probably hitting a whole bunch of other things too, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, like, if we look at these stories, right? Even Jonah. Right?
Yeah.
Jonah's one of the most interesting stories in the Bible,
It is.
right? We hold him up as this almost hero of faith, but how does the book of Jonah end, right?
Yeah.
Like, not super warm and cuddly about where Jonah's headed.
Right.
And so we can see the impacts of what happened to Cain. We can see the impacts of what happened to Jonah, right?
Actually, I think it ends. He's under a tree, right? And he's so angry.
And God is asking questions,
Yeah.
basically, and that's it.
Just stops.
We got nothing else after
Right.
that. So,
Yeah.
yeah, it's just kind of interesting. Like, he let that sour himself to the point of, questionably being
Yeah.
a follower at that point.
That's right.
It's interesting.
Sonny, you about to say something? Okay. Anybody else? All right. So here's the next piece. Again, I know you don't need a whole bunch of this, but the damage that anger does, kind of a no duh, right? As we go back to some of these things, like what's interesting is how a lot of these connect to one of these forms of abuse or leaving of scars and all those things, right? Now, I don't bring that up for the no duh, Jed, it does damage, but for us to understand that if we are going to continue to talk about building Christian homes and what happens at home changing the world, well, what does it look like when we're just sniping people and throwing hand grenades all over the place, doing the same things that we see out there? So what do we do about it? How do you deal with your anger, like realistically? What do we do about it? And look at some stuff that James says. You do anything about it, or you just let it ride?
I keep thinking back to like what we see, because you talk about the anger and how it clouds our judgment. We deal with kids, and one of the things that we use is the red brain, yellow brain, blue brain, or green brain. And when they're in that red brain, like they're gone. Like, and we as someone having to help them have to recognize that and not rationalize with them in that moment. They are not able to rationalize in that moment. And so we instead think about ways that we can bring into at least the yellow where you can start rationalizing. So you talk to them about breathing. You talk about things they like. You try to get them to, outwardly use their anger in a safe way. Like, so if it's a physical, like I need to express this. So, okay, squeeze this, do this.
Yeah.
So I think about that in relation to our homes, is that sometimes we leave that in those moments because I'm not connected. That is not a family member of mine, so it's easier for me to handle
Yeah.
that than it is my own family, my own kids in those moments. But I think it still applies. We have to even teach ourselves those things. If I'm angry, how do I de-escalate myself before I handle it, before I throw the grenade? You know? And I think that we can teach our kids that too. And usually what Kane, you know, he, like you said, it's okay to be angry. We have to use that phrase with our kids. It's okay for you to be angry, but how we handle that. You need to talk about it. You need to talk to me, you know. I think that's how we kind of deal with the damage before it gets there.
Yeah, no, I know she's in here, but Megan is probably the best I've ever seen. Took me a while to figure it out, but like when things escalate, she just says, just leave me alone, go away, I'll be fine in a minute. And it's super, I mean, I was raised in a family of 10 kids, so it's like when there's a problem, guess when we're dealing with it? Right now. I'm not used to that kind of stuff, right? And so, you know, I think it takes also, I think for us, you kind of brought up us or trying to incorporate that into us. I need to kind of know how the other person deals with their anger when they reach that point, and then how do I, and trying to learn so that it doesn't erupt into something to where we're just staying in the red, staying in the red, staying in the red, right? Hillary and then Drew.
I'm just gonna say, like, to me, it's all about awareness. Aware of what triggers me to get to that point. Aware of what triggers Nick and or our kids. And it can be something so silly, and it can be something like that doesn't bother him, you know, makes me angry, or vice versa. But just the awareness and like acknowledging, okay, you know, like I'm there.
Yeah, right. Well, and the other
Figuring out
person
to
respecting
regulate
the fact that you're there, right? Yeah, I'll stop right there, Drew.
Hillary kind of hit on it, but like communicating through that is really helpful. Like, I'm also married to a Megan that's really good at that. I just need a few minutes. Just let me go breathe. But like just being able to communicate and say things like that is really helpful, because I, as a man, also do the same thing. Like, I just want to fix this right now. Like, why don't we just figure this out and get this over with and we're done. But like, her brain does not work that way. And that's okay. But like, sometimes I need help being like, well, okay. Like, I can wait. I just didn't know I needed to.
Yeah, it's interesting how most of us men, you know, like we'll sit there in the red and think that we can rationalize with a woman who's also in the red. That's an impossible situation, right? That's hard. So let's look at James. Here's just a few things. I know you've seen these, but James says in James 1:19-20, this you know, my beloved brethren, everyone must be quick to hear, slow to speak, slow to anger. So, you know, really there's three things here. Be quick to hear. I mean, if anger shows its face, we're saying when it's misinformed, and that's a part of this conversation, or it's misdirected, then how does being quick to hear help alleviate the anger itself?
I just think it's interesting that comes first. Not slow to speak, but quick to hear.
Quick to hear. Yeah.
Be willing to listen to what somebody else has to say or what's brought on them.
Yeah, you're looking for, I think it's important. That's the only way you can really gather factual information if the anger is misinformed, right? Is to listen to what's happening and gather up all the details. And so I think a part of this, maybe why it's mentioned first, I mean, being quick to hear does not allow you the opportunity to let your emotions drive the train, right? It is instead what I'm hearing, what I'm taking in, and that's sometimes the moment we need to de-escalate a little bit. Christy?
And talking about kids, this has been a big verse for us this year, and be a first-time listener.
Yeah.
Like, help me not get to that point. If you listen to me the first time, then, you know, it really helps the situation. It helps us not have to get to that point where we're speaking.
Yeah.
I don't want to, but I feel like they lead me there. So
Yeah. Hey, the first time listener
Yeah.
shows up a lot in our house, except it usually comes with a kick. A flick? No, I'm kidding. No, you know what's also a part of this, like how oftentimes, maybe it's you, husband and wife, but I would say more so with kids. We immediately are at that point. So part of what we say to them is, I don't want to hear it. You ever said that? And I'm not saying there's not a time and a place for I don't want to hear it. Like I got all the information. But sometimes wouldn't you say, we try to justify this emotion by saying, I don't want to hear it so I can stay in the land of anger, right? And so sometimes I would say, maybe not when they're little, but when they get a little bit older, sometimes we do need to hear them out. But we do need to listen to what they have to say. And so sometimes also it's not even, I don't want to hear it saying that out loud. Sometimes it's just the attitude that I have of, I don't want to hear it. Doesn't matter what you say, it's not going to change the outcome. But if we're going to teach them to, I don't know, deal with people in such a way where I'm angry, they may not be, or the other way around, doesn't that involve some of this, being quick to hear and not having the attitude of, I just don't want to hear it, right? Go ahead, Hillary.
Nick and I often say to each other, and it's probably him more than me, and probably a little snarky, if you would just let me finish,
Yeah.
I was going to say blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
But when he starts, I'm like, I've already got it going right, what I'm
Jumping
gonna
in.
say, and I start saying
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
You could be quick to hear me and slower to speak. You probably wouldn't have to get angry.
Megan, quit looking at me. Let me, I'm gonna fast forward through some of this. All right, here's the next piece of this. So like Megan pointed out, be quick to hear. Now, be slow to speak, right? Which goes right in line with what we're saying. Now, I don't know if y'all were here, but maybe a month or so ago, we looked at James from the standpoint of the power of the tongue, right? And what does James say about the power of the tongue? What is it able to do? What? Okay, it starts a fire, it can set a whole forest aflame, right? So we already know that with the tongue. Now, what does that look like when we add in the emotion that is anger with the very thing that is able to set a forest aflame? You have just a recipe for disaster, right? Like that's a whole lot more than a forest. And so, we're the kind of people, usually most of us, where we're really fast to speak, slow to listen. We want to get our point in, but we talked about the self-control last week, that a part of the way that we can control ourselves is by not needing to be the one that's right. Right? I mean, that's a large part of self-control. If I'm not in it for the last word or I win, then things seem to kind of calm themselves down. I would say on top of this, Eric, I'm thinking about you and the story you told last week, but I can relate to those moments where I say something a lot quicker than maybe I should have. And it comes out terrible. Like just not what I intended, not the volume I intended, and it's just wrong. And so in those moments when we're too fast to speak, or it's the wrong tone, what needs to be the response?
I take that back.
Yeah, I mean, they're probably still going to feel some effects of that, but I can't tell you how many times I've said something out of a place like, who was that just said that? And I need to immediately try to rectify that in some way. I think when we recognize, we've talked about that with our kids, like how open we need to be with our kids when we mess up, and that's not what it should have looked like. And I'm sorry that I did that. And then on top of that, I'm thinking of one of my kids where we have to remind her, just because you're thinking a thing doesn't mean you have to say a thing, right? That you are allowed to keep stuff inside of your brain.
We all have one of those, Jed.
Okay, all right. So
Or two.
I'm not trying to call anyone's kids out, but you know, that in and of itself, back to last week, is teaching them self-control. Those kind of reminders. Just because I have this thought doesn't mean it has to vomit out of my mouth, right, Marion?
I had teenagers, so if someone speaks, it's kind of like,
Good luck.
so it's like, sometimes I'm like, hey, just shut up. Like, you know, and you don't mean to tell me shut up.
Yeah.
But when they're like, if you're trying to talk, like, my son's trying to talk, my daughter's trying to talk all at the same time,
Yep.
nobody's not getting nowhere.
How about that? Is that anybody else? Okay.
And they're fighting, and then they start fighting with each other, and then you're on the cloud, you're 10, because then now they raise your voice
Well, maybe,
1,000 octanes.
yeah, maybe that's the place where it's appropriate to say, I don't want to hear it, right?
Yeah, and you
Both
do.
of you, yeah.
I don't want to hear it.
Right,
Just shut up, both of y'all.
yeah. Let's look at this last one before we run out of time, just slow to anger. You know, I just think like, if you can think on any time anger spilled over, and you're thinking of that moment, what would just one moment of calm, clear-headed thinking have done? And now what does that situation look like? Right? And again, this goes right back to Cain. God is trying to give him that moment before the anger bleeds over into something else, and he doesn't take it. So we see what it looks like. Now, in most cases, just to kind of end this conversation, then you guys can make any comments. We looked at Proverbs last week, and so here are a few. In that, oftentimes when Scripture talks about someone who was not in control of their anger, they're associated with a fool or being foolish. So a man of quick temper acts foolishly. Proverbs 14:29. Whoever's slow to anger has great understanding, that should say, but he who has a hasty temper exalts folly. Proverbs 16. Whoever's slow to anger is better than the mighty, and he who rules his spirit is better, he who rules his spirit than he who takes the city. That's the one we looked at last week. So there's an element here of self-control and just not reaching that place where it bleeds over into other things. And then, of course, verse 20 of James 1, the anger of man does not achieve the righteousness of God. If that's ultimately, and this is where we started, if that's what we're after for myself, and then also in my home, the Bible tells us anger is not one of those emotions that can get us to the place that we all long to be for ourselves and also for our kids. Andrew?
You have kind of like road rage, like someone picks you off, what does it do for you? Like what good comes out of it if you honking your horn, riding your butt? I feel like yeah, and like keep running it. Like it doesn't do any good for either one of you.
Yeah.
And that's kind of like this, like you just. But if you take a few seconds, you just like make a noise in the car.
Yeah.
Then all is good. You can
Making noise outside my car when I'm cold.
Well, I mean, that goes right in hand with the times, like, I don't know. I just know that anytime I've let anger lead or bleed over into other things that I shouldn't have said or done, it seems so stupid now, right? It seems so silly, right? True?
Sometimes it helps me when I think about verses to just kind of rephrase them in how I think about them. And when I think about the idea of being slow to speak and slow to anger, kind of the idea that comes to my head is just being thoughtful about our words and being thoughtful about our actions, right? And if I am thoughtful about the words that I am using, I am taking my time.
Yeah.
If I am thoughtful about my actions, I I am taking my time.
That's right.
I'm taking that breather, and I'm not going to act impulsively, because the opposite of acting thoughtfully is acting thoughtlessly, right? And we know what that looks like.
Yeah, good. Yeah, anyone else on this? Good, April?
Growing up, my dad always said, you know, if you blow up, that automatically puts the spotlight on you. So whether you're right or you're wrong, now you've created this huge problem. Now you are wrong, period.
Right.
And so it automatically creates this negative
Yeah.
light on yourself.
Right.
Where if you would have just stayed calm
Yeah.
and talked it out, maybe the right solution
Mhm.
in your favor could have been the solution.
Yeah, very good. I want to take you guys all the way back to, this was the first thing that we looked at, and just remind you of this from 13 weeks ago, that, you know, with all these things that we've looked at so far, that what starts at home can literally change the world. While we want to have the different approach and we want to change everything that is out in the world, well, good luck with that. You're going to exhaust yourself. But what you can control is what's inside your home and what we do together, right? So here's we close. I just got to thinking, you know, I don't know the best way to end this, but I hope you guys understand how much of a benefit it is to have each other. Like, just you guys, I don't know how many are in here. Rick, how many are in here? No, I'm kidding. 20, 30, and I'm driving over here. Jody and I have been looking a lot of like church statistics and stuff. Did y'all know that just what's sitting in here by way of young families is larger than about 60% of congregations throughout the entire United States? And we have that just in young families, even more so with our kids. We're extremely blessed. And before you leave, I just want you guys to know, you ever got anything? You ever dealing with something? You ever need anything? I'm here. Jody's here. The elders are here. Everyone's here to help. And I'll just speak on behalf of me, totally and completely committed and invested in you guys, whatever that looks like. So is Megan, I think. Yeah. she's taking away. So whatever y'all need and however we can help, you feel free to reach out. Thank you guys so much for the 13 weeks and have a good one.